In today's video, I want to give you a critical status update on the government shutdown. Here is the current situation, and frankly, it is incredibly embarrassing for the leadership in Washington, D.C. The Senate has attempted to pass the government funding bill an astonishing 7 times, and it has failed every single time. You would think that after the third failed attempt, they would recognize the definition of insanity doing the same thing and expecting a different result, especially if they refuse to change the content of the bill. The Republicans and Democrats are engaged in a complete failure of negotiation. They keep voting on the same thing, over and over, with the same result. What a shocker, right? They are going to vote on it again today, October 14th. I suppose their operating theory is that the 8th time will somehow be the charm. The bottom line is that the Republicans and Democrats are not making any kind of constructive progress right now. It is a full-blown, frustrating stalemate. If you were to ask for my opinion, I would say they should simply lock themselves in a room and not leave until they figure this out. Instead, the Senate adjourned last week, and they all went home. The House of Representatives has already been home for the past 3 weeks doing absolutely nothing. The Senate just came back to D.C., and we are now watching to see if they continue this game of cold shoulder and refusing to negotiate. But why would they care? These politicians are still getting paid while the rest of the federal workforce suffers. Let's look at the numbers. The Senate last voted on the funding bill on Thursday, October 9th. There are 100 seats in the Senate, and they require a 60-vote supermajority to pass this spending bill due to the effective use of the filibuster rule. The Republicans control 53 of those seats, and the Democrats control 47, including 2 independents who caucus with the Democrats. Neither party can do this by themselves. The Republicans and Democrats absolutely must work together. The last vote only garnered 54 votes in favor, meaning they were still 6 votes shy of the 60 they need to even advance the bill. The sticking points. What are they fighting over? The fundamental disagreement is dangerously simple. The Republicans are asking for a temporary extension of government funding for 7 weeks without asking for any major policy changes, giving them time to write full-year spending bills. The Democrats want a permanent extension of Obamacare subsidies and a reversal of Medicaid cuts that were enacted in the so-called One Big, Beautiful Bill. The Affordable Care Act subsidies are set to expire at the end of the year, which could lead to a massive 26% average premium increase for millions of Americans who rely on that support. You can certainly argue that the Republicans are simply asking for a clean, short-term measure, or you can argue that the Democrats are fighting to lower essential health care costs for the people. You are entitled to your opinion, but personally, I am just sick of the circus act and the unbearable political brinkmanship. The cost: permanent economic blindness. The immediate casualty of this shutdown is the economic data that the entire country relies upon to make smart decisions. The official jobs report that was supposed to be released on October 3rd never got published. The crucial CPI Inflation Report that was scheduled for October 15th is not happening. This information gap poses a direct threat to the Federal Reserve's ability to act. However, here is a critical piece of the puzzle that was forced into an emergency solution. The U.S. government has a statutory obligation deadline to produce the CPI Inflation Report in order to legally calculate the cost of living adjustment, or COLA, for the 73 million Social Security recipients. Since these recipients are one of the country's most reliable and vocal voting blocs, the politicians are absolutely terrified of 73 million angry voters. Therefore, the government called in an emergency situation to recall limited staff to produce that CPI Inflation Report solely for the purpose of calculating next year's COLA. The Senior Citizens League is currently projecting that the COLA will be bumped up by 2.7% next year. This emergency report, now scheduled for Friday, October 24th, is incredibly welcome news for the Federal Reserve. As you know, the Fed has been saying this whole time that they are data-dependent, relying heavily on the inflation reports to determine their interest rate decisions. The next Federal Reserve meeting is scheduled for October 29th, which gives them a few days to digest this critical CPI inflation data and proceed with their policy decisions. However, the longer the shutdown continues, the data blackout widens, which negatively influences business decisions regarding employment and investment for 2026. The Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan organization, estimates that the government shutdown will permanently reduce real gross domestic product, or GDP, by $7 billion if it lasts 4 weeks, and up to $14 billion if it extends to 8 weeks. This is money permanently lost to the American economy. The political fight and the permanent layoffs. While this paralysis in D.C. continues, President Trump announced that he is taking this opportunity to lay off a large number of federal workers. We are not talking about simple furloughs, where the employees return to work and receive back pay when the government reopens. President Trump is talking about permanent job cuts, formerly known as reductions in force, or RIFs. On October 10th, Russell Vought, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, posted that the RIFs have begun. The Office of Management and Budget confirmed that the cuts are substantial. Preliminary estimates suggest a few thousand jobs have already been permanently eliminated across multiple agencies. The unions are already promising to fight these mass layoffs with lawsuits, and it is expected to be a contentious legal battle. Leadership vacuum and the Nobel Prize distraction. The lack of negotiation is the result of a true stalemate, with neither party willing to risk losing the game of political chicken. President Trump delegated the negotiations to the top Republicans in the House and Senate, Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader John Thune. However, many Republican senators are quietly complaining, pleading for President Trump to get more directly involved. The consensus is that whatever Trump negotiates with the Democrats, the Republicans will ultimately unite and support it. The question is, why was President Trump initially not involved? He was busy focusing on securing peace agreements in the Middle East, making stops in Israel and Egypt before returning to D.C. The reason the peace agreements were so important to him was his ambition to win the Nobel Peace Prize. That ambition was effectively concluded when the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Venezuela's opposition leader. The White House communications director stated that the Nobel Committee proved they place politics over peace. However, the Nobel recipient dedicated the prize to President Trump for his decisive support, which may help smooth the political waters slightly. Now that his ambitions for the Nobel Peace Prize have concluded, President Trump is expected to refocus on the United States and, specifically, on reopening the federal government. The Republicans are looking for his leadership to break the current deadlock. The political standoff continues to have a massive human cost and a direct chilling effect on consumer behavior. Last week, there was a major concern that U.S. troops would miss their paychecks on October 15th. However, President Trump used his executive authority as commander-in-chief to direct the Secretary of War to utilize all available funds to ensure the troops were paid. This is unequivocally good news for the 1.3 million active duty service members. However, this executive order does nothing for the more than 2 million civilian federal employees, a majority of whom are either furloughed or working without pay, who are still going without a paycheck. Compounding this crisis, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, which provides food stamps to roughly 42 million Americans, is running out of funding. The Department of Agriculture has stated they do not have the legal ability to use contingency funds to continue the benefits past November 1st, even though many states are now suing the administration to force the use of those funds. This places millions of low-income Americans at risk of losing essential food assistance, further illustrating the severe consequences of the political gamesmanship. A Reuters poll shows that the blame for the shutdown is almost neck and neck between the Republicans, the Democrats, and President Trump. This blame distribution is the key to predicting the eventual resolution. The government shutdown is materially affecting millions of Americans, and as the polls indicate, neither party is doing itself any favors. They are both being blamed for the disruption. Once the politicians fully realize that this is causing them to lose future votes, a concept they care about more than anything, the interest of self-preservation will kick in. At that point, they will either come to some kind of agreement relatively soon, or one side will simply give in to prevent further political damage. The investor's perspective, waging on political incompetence from an economics perspective, we don't just observe the chaos, we analyze its predictable cycles for opportunities. The reason I highlight the political self-preservation factor is that you can actually make wagers on the resolution of these types of government events. I personally took a position in a futures contract, betting that the government shutdown will not last longer than 40 days. When I placed that wager, the odds were incredibly favorable, close to 1-to-1, which is a bet I will take any day when the market is underpricing the fear of a political resolution. My analysis is this: the political pain is accelerating, with layoffs and the halt of SNAP benefits increasing the pressure on both parties' core constituencies. This crisis is irritating, frustrating, and should never happen. But in the world of investment, it is a predictable work in progress that provides a clear opportunity for those who are willing to bet on the eventual resolution. Keep subscribing for updates. I look forward to reading your comments on the situation.